David, he was just a love of life. He was so wild.
He had a high concentration of salt in his blood, which eventually led to his death.
Who would believe that a mother will harm her own child?
On the 20th of August 2001, David Stocker died in the world-famous Children's Hospital, Great Ormond Street. He'd suffered a massive cardiac arrest 2 days earlier, from which he never recovered. The investigation found evidence of poisoning. Unusually high levels of salt were discovered in his system, almost twice the normal amount. The question for doctors and police was, who could have done it? And amazingly as it seemed, they had only one credible suspect.
She killed her seriously ill 9-year-old son by spiking his hospital drip with salt. Now Petrina Stocker from Romford in Essex faces jail after being found guilty of manslaughter.
During her trial, the court heard how doctors were unable to treat her son David because Mrs. Stocker misled them.
Tonight, how a mother's love for her son turned into a fatal obsession. The mystery surrounding the boy's death and the shockwaves it sent through the medical profession. Petrina Smith was born in 1963. She grew up just outside London, in Romford, Essex.
She was a very happy child. She was never any trouble at all as a child. She mixed sociably with everybody. She had no problem whatsoever.
At 16, Petrina met Keith Stocker. At 19, she married him. And 10 years later, she became pregnant.
Petrina was absolutely elated when she found she was pregnant. Well, that was her life. It's what she wanted. She was completely overjoyed. She threw her arms around me. Oh, no, wonderful. She was just so happy about it.
Petrina gave birth to baby David on the 27th of March 1992. According to relatives, she devoted herself to her new son from the very beginning.
Her whole life was David. Right from when it was mothers and toddlers, and they would sing the songs together.
David later attended his local primary school in Hornchurch. His teachers described him as a very active and hard-working pupil, while his mother became involved in all aspects of his school life.
They would sit together and do the homework and help him out with everything, and if he needed any books or if he needed anything to help him with it. He did very well at school, David.
To the outside world, the Stockers were a normal and happy family.
David's relationship with his mother, Petrina, was a good and close one. He was clearly very strongly bonded to her.
They were both two of a kind. They were both the same nature. Very quiet. They got on with what had to be got on with. That's probably how they got on so well together, because they seemed to know what each other was thinking, and well, there was so much love between them.
David was a happy-go-lucky and fit child through to and including his 9th birthday. He was active at home. His hobby was karate, and he had other activities as well.
He absolutely loved his karate, and he was very, very good. He did show right from the start a sort of a natural aptitude for karate. I really do feel that, given the chance, he would have come training probably 5 times a week.
David Stocker had reached the age of 8 without any significant illnesses. He was happy, active, and had a good school attendance record.
David was very healthy as a child. He was very fit.
But in late November 2000, David apparently fell ill. His mother wrote to the school explaining that he was suffering from stomach pains and vomiting.
David appeared to have a very ordinary bout of flu in around the Christmas time of the year 2000. Following on from that, he appeared to develop some abdominal cramping.
First noticed a change in David around about January of 2001, and it really showed itself by David seemed quite tired and listless and was lacking his usual concentration. Normally, you only had to sort of tell him something once and he would pick it up, but I found I was having to tell him things 2, 3, 4 times.
David's condition deteriorated. His school absences grew longer and more frequent, and he became less involved in his karate classes.
David's father, Keith, did actually tell me at that stage that David was having a problem, that he wasn't very well. He just said he had a tummy problem.
In February 2001, David was due to take his karate grading qualification. His teacher and parents decided he was too unwell to take part, but David himself was very determined.
David actually decided himself that he wanted to do the grading, and he turned up on the day, and to be honest, I wasn't expecting him to perform particularly well because he had been very obviously unwell, and he actually put in an absolutely blinding performance at his grading. And I think in the years I've been teaching, if we've given out 15 distinctions, that's a lot, and he actually got a distinction on that day.
Despite achieving that accolade, David was frail. And just 5 days later, his condition suddenly deteriorated.
David was brought into accident and emergency in Old Church Hospital on 23rd of February 2001. His symptoms were abdominal pain, and at that stage the diagnosis was constipation.
David was later discharged, but when his condition failed to improve, his mother Petrina took him to the hospital again.
He had 3 visits to A&E, and it was the 3rd visit on 1st of March 2001 that he was admitted under surgical team in Children's Ward in Old Church Hospital.
The doctors who examined him there realised his condition was more serious than they'd first thought. Acute appendicitis was diagnosed, and David underwent emergency surgery. But still, his health problems persisted.
On 3rd of March, he had his appendix removed. His post-operative recovery was not what we had expected. It was prolonged. He still complained of abdominal pain, vomiting, and the clinicians on the ward rounds found him very pale, lethargic.
When we went in to see David, it was after his operation. To be honest with you, he was absolutely listless. He had no life at all. He wasn't eating and wasn't sort of, as you'd expect a child that had sort of what I thought at the time was a minor operation. You'd expect him to be recovering.
As well as being slow to recover, David was displaying another worrying symptom. At irregular intervals, his urine samples contained blood. His doctors were puzzled. There seemed to be no medical explanation.
It was the 3rd week of David's illness from the start, and we were stagnating with no diagnosis, and it was appropriate for us to call for a second opinion, and that's why he was transferred to Great Ormond Street on 14th of March.
London's Great Ormond Street is one of the world's most renowned children's hospitals. It was hoped that doctors here would find a cure for David after months of mystifying illness. But soon afterwards, David's condition worsened, and doctors began to think the unthinkable. Was his own mother, Petrina, to blame?
The idea was that somehow the parent was getting some pleasure, some satisfaction out of doing this to the child.
March 2001. David Stocker, an 8-year-old boy from Essex, has been suffering acute stomach pain. After being admitted to his local hospital, Old Church, doctors perform an operation to remove his appendix. But they're worried by 2 facts. His condition does not appear to be improving, and he's also producing unusual samples. They feel a second opinion is necessary and have referred him to the Great Ormond Street Hospital for Children in London.
David was referred to Great Ormond Street because his doctors at Old Church were concerned that he wasn't getting better. That's not unusual. That is the reason why a significant number of children are referred to us each year.
David's parents, Petrina and Keith Stocker, went with him to the hospital. His mother was adamant that she would spend as much time as possible at his bedside.
It'd be the same as any mum if her little boy is ill, and David was very ill. But Petrina was coping. She's that quiet, coping nature. She doesn't seem to get ruffled.
Most parents will come with their child to Great Ormond Street Hospital if their child is admitted. Obviously, quite often the father's unable to stay during the whole admission, but it would be common, indeed normal practice, for a child's mother to be with their child throughout the admission.
Petrina wanted all the time to simply be able to get to the bottom of what it was that was not leading to him making a full and appropriate recovery from what would appear to have been a relatively minor episode of flu.
But, like the staff at Old Church, the Great Ormond Street team soon developed concerns about the irregularities in David's samples.
One of them was that the urine sample contained obvious blood on one occasion, and then soon after didn't have blood in it. And that's quite unusual. Normally, if you've got a reason for bleeding from your kidney or your bladder, then there'll be blood in a number of different urine samples.
There are many conditions where blood will be found in urine. They don't always necessarily conform to a standard. After his appendectomy, a catheter was inserted into David. Using technical language, there was trauma, injury occasioned to his urethra. The result of that would be the discovering, as was, blood in urine, as happened in David's case.
On the 18th of March 2001, David's drip alarm unexpectedly went off at 6:30 a.m. On inspection of his drip, nurses found unusual blood clots in the tube. 3 days later, the alarm went off again. This time, staff noted a cloudy fluid in the tube. The following day, when the alarm went off a third time, small flakes of what looked like chalk were discovered. The medical team were baffled as to how and why this was happening. One possible suggestion was that someone had been tampering with David's samples. But if so, who? The nurses began to look at the possibilities. And it was at this time that the condition Munchausen's by proxy, with reference to David's mother, was mentioned in his medical notes.
Munchausen's by proxy is a term that we started using in the 1960s to describe children who were brought to doctors by their parents with complicated symptoms of illness which nobody could work out, and they would often go from doctor to doctor to doctor. The children would have test after test after test, investigation after investigation. Actually, there was nothing wrong with them at all. They had no illness at all. The parent was simply telling you lies. So that was one group. And there was another group who actually did harm their children by doing really strange things to them. Injecting them with insulin. You know, maybe the parent was a diabetic, so they had insulin at home. Injecting them with dirty pond water. Briefly suffocating them repeatedly, things of that nature. So those two sorts of things were lumped together as Munchausen syndrome by proxy, because the idea was that somehow the parent was getting some pleasure, some satisfaction out of doing this to the child.
The possibility that David's mother might have been tampering with his samples and drip caused the staff to keep a closer eye on his bedside. But there were other possibilities to consider too.